Emme started as, and still is, a smart pill case. It was beautiful, award-winning, Apple-level designed, beloved. It was so well designed that nobody ever needed to buy a second one, and they've only had 5 returns in 3 years. The CAC, or customer acquisition cost, was $400, and the case retailed for $100. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Erynn Petersen, CEO of Emme, walks through what it took to flip those economics and what every hardware founder learns too late. Your margin is not like SaaS, where it's reliably 80%. It's more like 5% if you're lucky, and that's even before you spend $1 on marketing. You should also know that it is really expensive and fraught to market in women's health, much less women's reproductive health. This episode covers the full stack of hardware reality: minimum order quantities before any supplier will take your call, ad channels that shadow ban women's reproductive health products, the shift from SEO to GEO that reshuffled the deck, just as Emme had figured out content strategy, and the firmware versioning nightmare that AI has only recently made tractable. Erynn, great to chat with you on this Friday the 13th.
Happy Friday the 13th.
The lucky Friday the 13th. This is also a perfect month in that February is 28 days, and it started first on a Sunday, and then 7th is on a Saturday, so it's like the perfect rectangular calendar month.
Can't believe I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I'm sure there is some stat out there that, yes, this only happens once every 6,000 years or something like that.
Yeah, every alligator moon or something like that.
What is an alligator moon?
I just made that up.
Oh, okay. Once in an alligator moon. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It is so beautiful today. It's been so cold, and it is just really beautiful outside today.
Like clear blue skies. It's still cold out though, right?
It's still freezing cold.
Yeah.
But it is beautiful.
At least it's not gray and overcast.
Yeah. How about you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It is similarly blue skies and warm enough that the snow is starting to trickle out in rivulets onto the sidewalk, so that's nice.
Beautiful. And I saw that you all just closed down the applications for your hardware hackathon and that
We
the
did.
response has been fantastic.
Yes, there's some pretty crazy ideas in the applications that I'm very excited for folks to build.
Super cool. I can't wait.
Yeah. Okay, today we are here to talk about Emme. And what Emme is and where it started are two very different worlds. And like my interest is on the latter. Actually, now I've got my analogies all mixed up, but where Emme started, which was physical device and talking about like direct to consumer hardware, which often doesn't happen in healthcare startups, is my assertion. And that is what we will cover today.
Great.
Maybe give me an intro. Who are you? Where do you come from? What parts of healthcare do you currently occupy, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Erynn Peterson. I've worked in technology now since the mid 90s, and I started out in Seattle. At the time, Seattle had a pretty healthy startup scene, and eventually I went to a company, Amazon, that at the time was still very small and only sold books. And went to work there, and then traversed a couple roles there, as people do. Ended up helping the team that started the third-party seller services. So now where it's like the everything store. So I was one of the first 8 people on that team, which was really amazing. And that really set the ground for me to be able to take on large, complicated marketplaces and large, complex projects. That's where I spent my career. So I did that. I had an auction startup. I then went to Microsoft. I worked on Bing, the search engine, when it was very small, when it was still called Live. From there, I went to AOL, which at the time was still quite a big company. Then I did some projects at Time Inc. I went to work for the Department of Defense. I went to work for a company called Synacor, which nobody's ever heard of, but it runs all the back-end services for most of the big telcos in the United States and worldwide. Super interesting technical problems. And then after I went to the Department of Defense, I really wanted to make sure that I spent time working at companies that hadn't been negotiating contracts with the Department of Defense. It can be a very complicated world. So So I went to
Yes.
work for Drizzly, the alcohol delivery service, which was amazing. And then Drizzly sold Uber. And from there, I moved into healthcare because while I was at the DoD, I was like, if you worked in defense, like the next obvious step is healthcare. And now I'm in healthcare, and that's how I got here.
Which is more regulated and strict, DoD or healthcare?
I'd say healthcare.
Interesting. Are there certain things that come to mind?
Yeah. Lately, as I've been thinking about where innovation is happening in healthcare, I think about the example of field medics versus hospital medics. And field medics, when they're at war, all constraints are gone, right? All you care about is saving the person in front of you. And then you come to work in this suburban hospital, and suddenly there are a lot of constraints on how you can practice medicine. And all those constraints shape innovation and they shape the economy of medicine and they really shape the relationship between physicians and patients. When you contrast that with the defense industry is in this constant sense that we're going to have to just figure out how to break constraints and innovate. There's always this pressure to find a place where innovation can occur. And I'm not seeing that in healthcare quite yet, but we may well get there.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind for me in my very little exposure to DoD or any kind of militaristic standpoint is, hey, like, how are our adversaries looking to break our things every day, every minute? And that probably encourages you in this seat to think about, hey, let me be the first to break my own things. Like pen testing and red teaming, I think, are things in the back of my brain that are somewhat related here.
This is actually an amazing place to start talking about healthcare hardware. So one of the concepts that I have long relied on as a CTO, and I really pushed hard to drive and understanding this concept when I was at the DoD, that people talk about preparing for adversarial threat in your systems. But the biggest threat to your systems is actually just something going wrong because somebody on your team made a simple mistake. And so when we think about how to build systems defensively, the starting point should always be how do you build systems that are as resilient as possible and safeguard against your own opportunity for error as well as third-party intrusion into the system. Ramifications of both of those things are the same, right? Like when the internet goes down to the East Coast because somebody fat fingered
Yeah.
port number, the ramifications are as severe as if somebody decided to be intrusive.
Mm.
When you're thinking about medical hardware and when we're thinking about the repercussions of
Ah.
building right now for medical hardware and for the use of data in making decisions with medical hardware, I think one of the things for us to be thoughtful about is what does resilience look like for us in the med tech community? What does resilience look like as we're building? What are the experiences that we want to safeguard for patients and also, by the way, for physicians? I think the technologists don't think about. If you're a technologist and you break something, our bad, it broke, even if there's a terrible outcome. But if
Yeah.
you're a physician and you break something, you're personally liable. And so there's a very different burden of considering resilience for a physician or what happens if there's an unexpected outcome for a physician than there is for a technologist. And it'd be super interesting to bring that to bear in developing hardware and particularly hardware that's making decisions for patients.
Yeah. The words that come to mind are like malpractice, right? If something goes wrong for a clinician, an unexpected outcome on a patient, there is the threat and worry of a lawsuit, which has its own like bizarro world where medical legal stuff, doctors have to, or clinicians have to practice defensively and over order or et cetera things. And the analogy here for technologists is I went in my undergrad. I was a engineer, and you have an engineer's code of ethics. I was a biomedical engineer, and I did not go like deeper into that. But like I knew even coming out of undergrad, civil engineers had to take this like oath. I did not have to, oddly enough. But is this kind of like in the plane of what you're talking about? Like when we're building hardware, or even if we go even further into software engineering, we have gotten a little
Cavalier.
scot-free cavalier
Yeah.
with our decisions, and like where is our own engineering code of ethics oath that for civil engineers, if a building that you design falls down or a bridge falls down, that weighs on you, that is on you.
Wow, I had not gone that far with it, but that is a really interesting thought. That concept does not exist in software engineering. And that would be a fascinating place to draw a line in the sand around med tech engineering. Is to say, we're going to have an oath here about how this hardware performs for patients, how it performs for physicians. And then if we could also extend that to, and we're going to have an oath around how we use the data that we collect from people, that would get really interesting really fast.
Coming back to like maybe the top, Emmy, I on the website, we will never sell your data.
We will never sell your data.
Yeah, and that's coming from the roots of Emmy, which was a smart pill case.
Yes, managing birth control specifically.
Yeah.
It was a project that came out of Stanford. It was founded by the original Emmy team, and they did an incredible job building this beautiful birth control case. It was designed with Kate Spade's design team, just beautiful. The app is beautiful, and the team was determined to ensure that data remained private when it was collected on behalf of its users. And so I knew that the company was coming up for sale. I knew that there'd be interest in this data. And I reached out to the team that owned it and said, hey, if you decide to sell this, I would love to buy it because I just want to make sure that this data remains private, remains uncompromised. And so Emmy came up for sale again, and I bought it. Then I had to figure out what to do with it.
Right.
Right?
How did, now that we're talking down in this code of ethics for engineers and things, how did they originally conceive of, hey, this data is sacrosanct and important, and we, one, will safeguard it. So there's some maybe normal software engineering things around security and privacy, but then also I'm jumping ahead in what we've discussed, but how did they think about the long term of, and be able to say confidently, we will never sell your data?
It came from a place of principles, right? There were the founding team, it's a deeply principled team, and they believed that having autonomy over your reproductive choices gave you agency and autonomy over the direction of your life. I think that is reasonable to say that they believe in autonomy and agency over your decisions. When you're asking people to do something as personal as keeping track of their birth control and their reproductive cycles and their sex life, all of which can be tracked in the app, you really want to, if you're a technologist who believes in autonomy and privacy of user data, you really want to make sure you're building out an experience in which that data is safeguarded, that data is stewarded. I think one of the challenges that the team faced as it was growing was that there was so much pressure to find ways to sell this very valuable data. And they just didn't want to. And there are thousands and thousands of people, thousands and thousands of women who have trusted Emmy with their data. And that data continues to be held very tightly.
With this, let's talk about the hardware. I've looked at the case. It's lovely. For context, before I came to work in healthcare, I worked at a direct-to-consumer kitchen appliance company. And I was that was my first product manager gig, and I was responsible for the e-commerce funnel. So when people came to our website, my realm was the conversion rate between them and added to cart and purchase made. And then also a little counter metric was also return rate that I learned maybe 6 months down the line. Oh shoot, we are actually seeing a spike in returns. What happened? I thought the only metric I was optimizing for was cookers sold. So let's talk about hardware. I think the first place that I wanted to start was maybe high-level overview of this. Like, I wrote a whole bunch of things like the technology, the ops processes of having to like ship, managing suppliers, finding suppliers, what if your suppliers hold out on you, et cetera, et cetera. Can you give me a high-level overview of that?
Yeah, so when we think about developing consumer hardware, people tend to think about developing med tech hardware as separate from developing other consumer products, right? And And that plays out in a whole bunch of ways. And Emme was one of the first teams to bring that together. So the case is beautifully designed. It's not going to break. It got all the FDA approvals. And also, I mean, it's just so beautiful to touch and it fits in everybody's purse. When you open it up and any birth control pack is going to fit on the inside, it just feels so nice when you touch it. It's just a beautifully designed piece of hardware. And I think that is starting to creep into hardware developed for the med tech space. But where you are seeing it come in is like on the consumer devices, like the Whoop is a beautiful device, the Oura Ring is a beautiful device. But if you've ever had to take care of a very sick person in their home, you realize that these devices are not beautiful, right?
Yeah.
As you put in a bathroom, not beautiful. The underwear you ask people to put on, not beautiful. We're starting to see innovation there. There's a team developing it's really interesting underwear called Zamanti. And I'm like, okay, that's super interesting. But by and large, not only are we divorced from the aesthetic constraints of developing beautiful consumer products, the med tech industry tends to be divorced from the economic realities of bringing these products to market. I think that's where it gets really interesting. There has long been this assumption that if you're going to build a piece of hardware for the med tech market, it has to be something that insurance companies are going to pay for. And the route to revenue and the route to profits is driven straight through payers. And I think that has been getting harder and harder for the last 5, 10 years. And I think that, along with a lot of the economics around how we pay for US healthcare, is just changing so rapidly that it's putting pressure on the economics of teams who are developing hardware for the consumer space. I actually think we're going to get to someplace good with this. I think we're going to get to a place where people who are developing hardware that's expected to be used by consumers for their health are going to develop things that are attractive to consumers to buy. I think we end up with better stuff.
Yeah. The end game for maybe the last 10, 20 years has been to get a CPT code,
Yeah,
right? Once you get a CPT code, you're
you're
golden.
golden.
Yep, for your device, for your whatever technology you are trying to get to market. And your observation is that maybe that window is closing, or like we are going to talk about in a second, ad channels get less efficient over time as more competition shows up inside of the ad channel. And so maybe this one is becoming more saturated and therefore less effective. And the counterpoint of that you are seeing is maybe some of those teams and innovation are going the consumer route and saying, oh, now we need to actually be aesthetic and quite good at our industrial design game.
Yes, and affordable. I think about teams like, I don't know if Make Lab out of New York. It's run by a woman named Christina Perla. And they are making it as fast and easy to develop. And you just found them. They're fantastic. They're really lowering the barrier to industrial development. And I think that we're seeing the same rapidity of iteration and explosion of innovation that's happened in software because of AI correspondingly happening on the manufacturing side across the United States in a way that we really haven't seen in the last 20 or 30 years. And so be able to marry these two things together and take advantage of this new capacity, new capability is going to be really interesting.
There's this word called tooling that I understand in like factory stuff. Like it's not like you just spin up a bunch of conveyor belts. You have to build machines that create the tools that allow you to build the factory, right?
Yeah.
And like in certain cases, if you have a lovely 3D model you actually have not designed all of the parts for, you may actually need to invent a new machine that can extrude or create the part that you need. And that takes considerable time, takes
Yep.
considerable expense, and our expertise for that has hollowed out over the last 30 years in the United States from
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
manufacturing standpoint, and
Yeah.
probably gone to China or Southeast Asia.
Yeah. And we're seeing renaissance of that, right? Like we're seeing pockets of it here. We're seeing it in New York City. We're seeing it in San Diego. What's really interesting is we're seeing that in Rhode Island, which is fascinating.
Ah,
And
your neck of the woods.
my neck of the woods. And one of the things that's interesting about watching it happen in a place like Rhode Island is Rhode Island has heavily regulated industries that sit here. We have defense, we have green tech, we have healthcare. We've got CVS here, we've got Brown University Health here. And we're also a small enough place geographically that you can get to anybody that you need to get to develop whatever it is you want to develop. We've recently seen the rise of defense companies like Vatten and Anduril moving in office here because, in addition to having some defense development capabilities, we also have a history of boating development. And so we have people here who are really good at doing smart, interesting things with composites and building out the tooling, for example, to bring things to scale once they've finessed and figured out the manufacturing process on a really small level. I think that kind of manufacturing base is starting to take off again in the United States. You can marry that with AI driven software development, I think things start to get really interesting. Like if you go back 10 years ago, like imagine you wanted to develop, I don't know, name a piece of med tech hardware. Your software team would be in one state, your
Yeah.
hardware team would be in another state, and never the twain shall meet. And here you can very quickly teach your hardware team how to use AI tools to iterate the software, even in turn with what they're iterating on the factory floor. It
Yeah.
gets really interesting.
Yeah. I've been reading the Apple in China book about how China became to be the home for what designed in California, created in Shenzhen or something like that. I
Yep.
forget if they ever updated that, but what unlocked in the beginning was that they would ship Apple engineers, designers, manufacturers
Right.
over to
This is a
China.
great example.
I just read the part in the book where Apple actually got United to open up a new route between SFO
That's
and
right.
Shenzhen or Hangzhou.
Yeah.
And they said, we will make this flight profitable to you. Like, that is our guarantee.
I think that that is really interesting. There's also another element too, which is the regulatory element, which I
Hmm.
don't think you can discount either, which is that the regulatory climate in China allowed for a sort of innovation that was really more difficult to do here. Like it was easier to move all those engineers to China, right?
Right.
You have the
Yeah.
working hard people where people do the and what we're seeing here in the United States increasingly is a taste for creating the regulatory climate required for this kind of modern engineering to occur.
That is, even aside from the desire to do, there's a pre-existing thing where, hey, we got to ease up the ability to build a factory in place. Like if I were to try and do that, I would have untold years of just lost
Yeah.
productivity on that. Yeah.
And that's where this sort of concentration of getting people together starts to make a big difference. So, thinking about two different examples in my head, this morning I ran out for breakfast. I ran into a VC here in Rhode Island. He had just had dinner last night with one of our senators, Jack Reed, who happens to be on the Arms Committee, and they were able to talk about some things really quickly. And in a place like Rhode Island, you can identify the people manufacturing, the people doing software, and the people who are able to help you think through the regulatory issues and what has to happen from a regulatory perspective to make things happen in heavily regulated industries. And once you've done it in one
Mm,
heavily regulated industry, you have a template for doing it in others. You do it in defense, you can do it in healthcare, right? And then I think about the event that you have coming up in San Francisco, where you have hardware people and software people coming in from all over the place to take part in this event. And you've got, from my observation, just from the people I've heard are going, you've got people who are at the stage of their careers where they're really hands on and they're really close to the product. And you've got some very senior people who are capable of making industry wide change and industry wide decisions. And that's a kind of innovation that happens when people get together face to face and are able to spend time in close quarters.
yeah. You heard it here first. Return to office.
Oh my
That's what we're
God.
calling for.
Oh man. Wow. That took a quick, sharp millennial turn, didn't it?
Sorry.
I
No,
mean, I'm sitting here in my
in
house,
in
right?
all, to be clear, what I take from that is the ability to hop into a room and not have to take the tax of one, just like communication lag. If I send a Slack to you, it's going to take some time for you to process it, and then when you send a Slack back to me, or an email or a fax, because we're in healthcare, there's some tax taken there. And then there's
Yep.
also tax to my inability to read how the words I'm sending to you land and immediately follow up of, oh, I don't think I delivered that correctly. Let me explain further or rephrase, and being able to get everybody into a room together so that you can see the light bouncing from their face to your eyeballs so that you can like talk faster. There's a power to that.
Yeah, I think there is. And you know what else I've noticed too lately when I get together in rooms with people? So if you go back pre-COVID and you had a bunch of people getting together in a room, everybody would have, especially tech people, everybody would have their laptop in front of them. The laptop would be open. They'd be physically present and they'd be popping their heads up if something, the topic was germane to them. But now you get together in a room and people are, their devices are in their pockets. People are frequently looking at each other. They're maintaining eye contact. They're talking to each other. Everyone is implicitly valuing that time spent face to face in a way that is sort of a throwback. And I think that the quality of the time that we're spending with people when we're face to face is just very high and very good.
Let's come back to Emme, hardware, and maybe the D2C model. It's taken us a while to get to this, but the premise of this podcast is learnings from past companies where we've worked or been a part of that we extracted lessons from that we think the next generation should take. My ideal listener here is somebody who is like an industrial designer or a product software or hardware product manager or an engineer who's been tasked with doing something hardware related in healthcare. And one of the things that I wanted to chat with you about are the hard economics and margins of hardware. We talked a little bit about like bill of materials and shipping, return rate, and also in our way back original conversation, like customer acquisition cost and lifetime value, and the thinking of how to think about one device being shipped off to a customer and modeling that as a whole. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is so important. And I think the economics of developing med tech hardware, the economics of developing hardware are hard. And med tech, it's hard, and there's often a very good reason to develop it. And so I don't want to discourage anyone, right? I'm saying that I don't want to discourage innovation at all here. One of the things that was really intriguing to me about Emme is that the case for Emme was beloved. The Emme Smart case was absolutely beloved by its audience, by journalists. It won all sorts of design awards. And the customer acquisition cost for an Emme customer was around $400 per user, which is about, from my understanding, it's reasonable for a health tech product. But this was a one-time luxury good purchase of around $100. Once you buy one smart case, they're incredibly durable.
Yeah.
We have people coming back after 5-6 years asking for a second one. You don't need to buy more than one. And so you've got this customer acquisition cost of $400 for a case that is going to retail for around $100, and the economics just don't foot. So one of the first things we did was turn the business over so that we were selling the app. Prior to this, the app had been given away. So we were selling the app and we were giving the case as a loss leader associated with the app. And so eventually we got the unit economics to where our customer acquisition cost was around $25 and we had an LTV, a lifetime value, a lifetime expected revenue of in the mid 30s. That was based on the average length of time we had observed people stayed on the birth control smart case. Interestingly, the reason people stopped using the smart case and start using the app is because they would decide after a while, I think I'm going to get pregnant now.
Yeah.
Right? Decide I'm going to get pregnant now. You're not going to use the case the same way. And so we estimated that our LTV was somewhere in the high 30s. And we're like, okay, great. So we have this nominally profitable. And we learned a lot getting to a place where we had the customer acquisition cost down in the mid 20s and the LTV in the 30s.
I am experimenting with some fun visual cues to let folks know that we are in the money or ad or sponsored zone. So expect some different costumes over the next couple of episodes. The background context that I bring into this episode is I got my product manager start at a direct-to-consumer kitchen goods company. And there, I wasn't my full-fledged product management, kind of like who I am now, or as I was maybe 2 years ago at this point. But I was in charge of the website, in charge of the e-commerce funnel, and making sure that people who were in the mid of funnel progressed to the bottom of funnel and purchase and device activation as quickly and in high percentages as possible. And one of the things that I allude to in the episode is the number of returns that we would get. That really surprised me. I was probably maybe like 6 months into the job, and I was patting myself on the back for all of the devices that we had sold. And then somebody from support comes to me and is like, hey, we're getting like a lot of returns. And we're actually losing money on each of the returns because we have to pay for shipping. We kind of have to eat the cost of the entire device. And what are we going to do about that? And I was like, I did not even think about returns. So that brings us to today's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Toboggan Labs. If you're selling a physical health product direct to consumer, here's a stat that probably won't surprise you. Across the industry, a third or more of mailed health kits never make it to a completed result. Cancellations, kits that ship and never come back, blockers from insurance. You're setting money on fire, and you may not be able to see where the smoke is coming from. Toboggan Labs is a healthcare AI firm. They're working with a direct-to-consumer health testing company right now, and they've dug into this exact problem. Where do kits go? Why do orders drop off? What is the true cost per completed test? Then they designed a new ordering flow, fulfillment integrations, and the data infrastructure to fix it and track it. That part is key. If you're building or fixing a DTC health product, find them at tobogganlabs.com. However you spell toboggan, it'll get you there. But if you have to look it up like I did, that's TOBOGGAN, labs.com.
Healthcare is a very difficult market in which to advertise for a few reasons. One, there's a lot of competition. Two, the channels are constricted. So there are places where other industries can advertise that you can't advertise, especially if you're doing women's reproductive care items. You get shadow banned from major search services. You get shadow banned from the social services. It's just the policies change all the time. Like I just noticed this morning when I was on Reddit that the Reddit ad policies have changed sometime again in the next 6 months. And they're actually a fantastic partner to advertise these sort of med tech items, but you have to build a relationship and you have to be okay to sell them, which in a world of hysteria around what is good healthcare advice and what is not is probably reasonable, but it is just an additional barrier that you have to hop through as a med tech company that you don't if you're developing sneakers, for example. And so that means that once you've developed this product, even if you've tested it, and even if your potential users love it, and it's hard to overstate how much people loved Emme, you then have to develop this competence in marketing. And today, you have to develop this competence in marketing where the entire marketing game is shifting from SEO to GEO. And so everything is just shifting underfoot, and it's just very tough.
And GEO
Oh,
is,
generative engine optimization.
oh goodness. I've seen podcasts about it and I'm like, I can't open that door. I can't open that
I will
box.
open that door for you. And it's a good place to talk about this. So at Emme, we were on the forefront of GEO.
Oh,
So
okay.
we looked 3 years ago, we're like, all right, we're going to figure out how to make this company profitable. Search is changing. There's going to come time where a user's going to put in a request and they're going to get one reply at the top, and we want to be that one reply. And we made that investment. Our content is fantastic. And then the way that people ended up using Chat GPT was completely different than how the search engines expected, how frankly I expected consumers to be using. And so we developed this competence, and it turned out that that was maybe early developed.
I see. So I'm tracking, is this the content on the blog?
The
Or
content on the blog, the content in our app, the content that we buried in all of our help pages, just the industry developed in a different area than we thought it was going to develop. I think it caught everyone, and nobody predicted the success of ChatGPT or Claude, right? So if you're a med tech hardware company, so now you've got all this money that you've invested in the development of your item. You've got all this money that you've invested in the tooling and getting this thing to market. And then the very channels that you use to get something to market are changing underfoot right now. And it's just a very challenging situation.
I'll speak to my past self on this, right? Like past Alex came from software SaaS in San Francisco. And so the way that past Alex or hopefully listener, the mental model of a startup is you build a piece of software and then you sell it infinite times for more money and then therefore achieve 99% margin or infinite margin if we're living in an infinite revenue world. But the expected margins are like 80%, an insanely high percentage of what you would think is like a good business to be in. The first change that you are going to have to think about is you are probably going to have to be developing for a way longer time. I guess like maybe a payback. It's not necessarily a payback period, but it's basically like, hey, we hired all these engineers, we got some seed funding and we're burning it down. But at a certain point, we are going to hit V0 of launch. We're going to launch on Product Hunt and we're going to be off to the races. But for hardware, that's probably going to be longer because you're going to have to develop the physical design of the thing that you are trying to build. You're going to have to go find suppliers. You're going to have to negotiate contracts with the suppliers, probably for minimum orders or minimum quantities before they will even think about getting in business with you. And so all of that is like money that you are not even able to sell to somebody yet. So I think that's the first thing. I'm going to pause here. Is that, how do you see that?
I think that's wildly accurate.
Okay. And then from there, after you have crawled through glass to get 1,000 quantity order in your hand, they are lovely, they are as beautiful as you thought, then you are going to find, oh, actually, my margin on this is not 80%, it is 5%. Because, and that's even before I have done marketing, right? Before I have even figured out how to let people know that this exists. And then from there, with that remaining 5%, you probably pay some amount of that to Facebook and Instagram and Google at the time. Maybe now with GEO, there is some other metagame that I just do not know. What is a good margin for a hardware company if they're doing everything right?
That is such a great question. It doesn't even begin to approach software margins. I could only hazard a guess on that.
Sure. Yeah.
Grocery stores are 3%. Let's say a good margin.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, grocery stores, I think, are around 3. So let's a good grocery store. So let's say 5 to 10% is great. Yeah, not software. But here's one of the interesting things, right? And this, I think, is one of the biggest changes over the last few years is that 5 years ago, if you were developing a medtech device, it was not going to be collecting data. And anything you develop right now is going to collect data. And develop. And so I think that the revenue stream comes from the use of that data.
I see. Which puts you, if you are adhering to your engineer code of ethics and you are principled about what you want to see in the world, you have to resist the urge to a very tempting urge to say, yeah, it's for the greater good, right? Like to get more devices into more people's hands, we need revenue to do that.
And correspondingly, that means that you have to front load into your conversations with your investors realistic expectations for what they're going to see as a return on their investment.
Yeah.
Because if you bring in someone who is used to seeing software style returns and their portfolio demands and depends on those software style returns, and you're hitting a place 3 years in where it's not looking like you're going to have those, but you've got this wildly valuable source of data, it makes it really hard to manage those expectations at those point of those investors unless you front loaded those conversations when you took those checks.
Yeah. Wow.
But those investors are out there, by the way.
They are? Okay.
They are out there. So those investors are out there. And maybe that's one of the early ways to stress test your idea and see, is this worth building and trying to get to market? If you can find one of those hardware investors and they say, yeah, this is worth bringing to market, you're tapping into not just their opinion, but you're tapping into their experience of everything they've seen come in front of them in the last 3, 6, 9, 12 years. They're able to give you an informed assessment of whether or not they're going to invest in it and safeguard your data in a way that nobody else is going to be able to.
Okay, I'm back. So speaking of never selling your data, we are selling a conference about data. June 25th to 26th in Boston, we are running back Data Camp. So last year was our first Data Camp and kind of was a resounding success. We pride ourselves on not doing regular boring conference stuff, like no hour-long keynotes with an exec talking over slides he clearly did not create about work he clearly did not do, and instead tactical sessions led by hands-on keyboard data practitioners sharing real condensed droplets of knowledge that they have accumulated over their careers. I, among many other things, coach the speakers. So if you like listening to me, consider applying and checking off the option of I want to speak at Data Camp, and you'll have me in your ear quite a bit. Two other things that I will add in here to try and get you to apply. So we do great swag. It is potentially one of the things I am most proud of in my career. So here is a sticker sheet that we created last year, and you'll see, data in the Philly love statue style. You will also see the with arms wide open, which is one of my proudest ever jokes. And then I also have this only data governance can judge me tattoo, or as a temporary tattoo, which if you apply and let me know, I will get one to you at some point in the future. Second point, I also have a secret mission to make a data rec room. So if you're familiar with a rec room, it is one of these padded rooms with baseball bats and chainsaws that allow, maybe not chainsaws, that allow you to get your aggression out. And I want to have physical representations of the healthcare data things that give us the most grief. So, I would love to have a really long paper mache EDI kind of like string that I can smash up and stomp all over the remaining bits of the delimited file. So hope to see you there. I'll put links in the show notes. Yeah. This is getting off topic, but I think you are the right person to ask about this. VC was not originally a capital vehicle for software. It was for Silicon Valley and
Right.
chips, which actually, and what?
Defense.
Defense. Yeah, out at what, Ames Field in
Oh,
San
yes.
Jose or something like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
with
yeah.
the dirigibles. Maybe this is a return to the roots of VC, right? Where originally it was, hey, we need $50 million to spin up the like factory line to produce these chips. And there will be a dip here, but then when we scale, that's where all of our profits live on like this curve
Right.
of the production scale.
Yeah. That's really interesting. There's also something too you just made me think of as long as we're talking about the investment vehicles. There's two people out of Seattle. They're married, Brian Bolin and Katie Bolin, and they're doing some really interesting work around donor advised funds and unlocking donor advised funds to invest in startups, particularly startups that align with a mission. And I think that is a really interesting way as an investor to be able to say, I want to direct some of my money towards something that is going to result in a net social good. I'm still going to receive a return on my investment, but I don't necessarily have to see the return on my investment that I'm going to see if I invest in the next social media network. It's a way to align, I think as a builder, it's a way to align yourself with the sort of investors who are primed to take a risk on you, put the money in, but the expectations for their return are aligned both socially and also fiscally with what you're likely to be able to show them after 3, 5, 7, 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't need a 10 bagger or whatever the slang
I
is.
just have one.
Yeah.
I just need to have a bagger.
And donor advised funds, are these school endowments? When
So
I hear donor,
it's a way to, by the way, like I am in no way, shape, or form an expert in donor advised funds, but it's a way to say, hey, I've had a 10 bagger. I'm going to take one of my bags and I'm going to put it over here in this a trust so I can direct how that money is spent, direct how that money is invested, I can put it towards social good.
okay, yeah. This is not, I'm putting money into this GP or LP or something and leaving all control to these
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah, it's really interesting set of vehicles. And there were just some changes made in the regulatory climate around the last year or so. And I noticed that last week there was a couple of big DAFs that announced a partnership with Play Money, to make it easier to use your donor advised funds to invest in startups who are showing up on Play Money. So that's an interesting thing.
Going back to our hardware, we've talked about the way lower margins that you should expect. We've also talked about how the remaining margin will be probably spent on customer acquisition cost, and how it is, depending on the industry that you are in, it is hard. You are playing on hard mode. One is health tech, but the second is reproductive care or women's care, which is a probably bad, not correct, yeah, label. But basically, like when you are building in a place such as Emme is, one thing to note is that how other people classify you is a thing that you need to like consider how that will show up in percentage points here and there.
That is a clear-eyed observation. Yes. I think that so right now we're seeing a surge in investor interest, in social interest, in menopause companies, for example. We saw a corresponding surge of interest in broadly femtech companies 5 years ago. And one of the things there's a lot that's interesting about that, right? One, I think it speaks to trends among investors and what investors want to put their money in at any given point. I think it speaks to changing social mores and how we talk about healthcare and what we talk about, right? And I think that there's this sort of dawning realization over the last 10 years or so that women's bodies have been thought of differently when we think about the healthcare system than men's bodies. And I think that it's just it's just a funny thing to talk about, right? It's just this complicated kind of stew of dynamics that if you're starting a company and you're building a product that's aimed at female bodies, you have to think about in a way that you don't necessarily have to think about if you're building an aspirin dispenser or something aimed at children, like Small Tap, which is aimed at babies. This is a great piece of hardware that helps take shots for babies.
Oh,
Yeah.
fun.
Right, it's fun. That's a great example. It's SMOLTAP, Small Tap. It is fun.
Oh,
It makes it easier to draw blood for babies. It makes it easier to give medicine. It's more comfortable for the baby. But the immediate reaction is, oh, that's fun, right? And you're not necessarily going to have that same reaction to a new IUD. You're not going to think, oh, that's fun. Right?
yeah.
What's fun about that? But we all know what's fun about that, right? But that's not the first thing we think about.
Yeah. More on the just the hardness of eking out margin here. When you choose to play in hardware, I asked you a question about firmware, and you had a very good response to that from your experience.
I am trying to remember it.
I will prompt the question again. At the cooker company that I worked at, we had a devil of a time handling firmware. I will give a rough definition, which may or may not be correct, but you've got hardware and you've got software. In my case, the software was an app on your phone that could control the temperature of this. It's a sous vide cooker, so it would keep a pool of water at a certain temperature. And I had a hardware dial that would scroll up and down to change the temperature, but I could also change it from my phone. I could also pause or start the cooker. The hardware was the cooker itself, the software was the app. The firmware does a bunch of stuff that I do not have the technical ability to describe in detail, but roughly is the middle layer between there. There's something also around booting it up, that there's some code on a little chip that has to run first before it can initialize all of the code on the other things. And roughly that is this thing called firmware in my head. And we had different versions ship that each had their own sets of little quirks, little bugs.
Yep.
And we did it for a while until we became wise to this. We did not track the version of the firmware that this serial number on the device had. So first we had to figure that out. And then afterward, we had to create this matrix of if user has this serial number and they are trying to interface it with this Android or iOS version or this phone, then the support route is this way. The support route
Right.
is, hey,
Right.
you can do these things and get the cooker back working again. Or the support route is, hey, forget that one. We're going to send you a new one, which is valid, instead of
Right.
wasting support hours trying to fix this thing.
Yeah.
So that's the firmware question.
Yeah. So that's such an interesting question because we talked about that, what, 6 months ago? And the landscape has already changed radically and how this is handled. So I would say for decades, firmware was a problem. One of the reasons that Microsoft became a huge company is that every single time they release a new version of Windows, starting from like the late 80s until well after 2000, every new version of Windows was backwards compatible with every app that had ever been written for any prior version of Windows. This,
Really?
this is a real thing. Yeah.
Huh.
It's an amazing technical achievement.
I could take my app from the early 90s,
Windows 95.
Paint, my Paint, and I could run it on a modern PC. Is
Yeah.
that the backwards
More
compatibility that
important,
we're talking about?
if you were a third-party developer and you
Mm.
had developed a heart rate monitor, for example, that used an app built for Windows 3.1, it would still work for Windows 95. It would still work for every subsequent version of Windows.
Wow.
So as a developer, you would build it once, and you were assured that for your users, it would continue to work on their Windows machines. And so what this did was it made it so much easier for software companies to get the funding to write software that was going to work on a Windows device, right? Here is you as an engineer to take a risk of, I'm going to put this software in my hardware because I know that, 80% of everybody with a desktop is going to be able to use it because they're all using Windows machines.
And forever and ever,
And
right?
forever and
Not, hey, in
ever.
the latest version of maybe Tahoe, it may break. I don't know for sure if Apple does or doesn't do this, but
Apple, totally separate question. We'll
okay.
just send Apple in over here in its own special box. Very beautiful box. But that was an amazing technical achievement. And it also meant that it just lowered the cost of iteration and innovation for developers all over the place. So one of the things that has happened is that when you develop hardware, if you develop firmware, unless you're really thoughtful about managing those dependencies and your own, as happened for you guys, you had your own hardware running your own software, and suddenly you had to manage that set of dependencies instead of worrying about shifting it off to a third party developer. This has been a very complicated problem for developers for a long time because the shape of the hardware itself, the storage that's available in that hardware, the way that it connects with, like all of that could change with every device. And then what do you do? AI and the rise of AI tools has made this OBE. It is no longer, yeah, it's not a problem you have to worry about the same way. Like I was thinking about that. I'm like, wow, 6 months ago, that was still a problem. But right now, you can pretty easily gin up a piece of software using any of the major chat engines that will manage that set of dependencies, that will manage that translation for you from any new firmware updates that you need to write now and make sure they're backwards compatible with your old hardware in the marketplace.
Wow. Is this a thing of, hey, like, here's my code base for software and here are like my versions. Please, Claude, can you? I don't actually have the language to understand that.
Yeah, it's a
What at maybe a
fascinating
high
question.
level?
So let's think about, and by the way, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not going to
No,
say
to be
it's but think about the problem you discovered working at your cookie company, right? You suddenly realize, oh, we need to figure out which version of firmware shipped out with which serial number of each item. And right now, you would just let your AI engine of choice figure that out for you as the customer service tickets rolled in.
I see. Yeah, it maintains a nice CSV for me, and
Exactly.
yeah,
Maintains the CSV. And then it can also build a corresponding translation layer to ensure that one of two things happens. Either your new firmware runs on all of your old environments, or that it automatically deprecates any features that are not going to run in that old environment.
yeah, it can do that analysis for me.
Yeah. So to detect, oh, this person's on an Android, not an iPhone, and they're on a really old Android, or this person's on a really old iOS because she doesn't want to upgrade to a bigger phone,
Yeah.
and she's still running version 13. So let's go ahead and automatically run for her this version of the firmware associated with the hardware for which the app is trying to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And what can AI do?
It always comes back to AI, right?
Here I thought that we were going to
How
be
we make
safe
it through
in a
this with
hardware
AI.
conversation from thinking about LLMs. Nope.
Right. Nope. Here we are. But we could talk about small language models, which I think are incredibly promising. And
Ooh.
I'm really curious to see how this comes up in your hardware hackathon.
These are kind of like our Quens and our llamas and
Yeah,
like
exactly.
local things that can run on board. Okay, yeah, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, super interesting.
yeah. Okay, I want to ask you, I think, my last big question before we close and plug things. We talked about buy it for life and planned obsolescence, which you can see my AirPod in here. The mic no longer works, and so who knows if that's my wear and tear or some galaxy brain scheme by the geniuses at Apple. But Emme, hardware company, but also having a stated mission to for from now until eternity to protect the data. You had a lot of ideas here that I would just love for you to start freestyling on.
Yeah. We think about our footprint frequently. And we think about our footprint on the hardware side, and we think about our footprint on the software side. So it's one of the reasons, for example, that we're looking at small language models. When we think about the hardware, we're aware that we've got hardware out there in the marketplace that is still running, still relies on an app that we still maintain in the Apple Store. Even though the product portfolio of our company has changed. So we've gone from focusing just on birth control to ensuring that people can access healthcare, right? Because you can't stay on birth control if you can't get healthcare. So we're focusing on healthcare access now as well. But we still maintain all the software and all the tools for all the cases that we have out in the marketplace. And we track those thousands of users who are still using them. And I remain impressed by how well designed that hardware was and the number of original cases. It's over 98% that are still out there, still running, and a large portion of them are still being used on a daily basis.
You gave me a stat that only 5 returns in 3 years.
Yeah, we're now up
That
to six.
that's
Six
crazy.
returns in 3 years. I mean, it's an amazing outcome.
Yeah.
And so we and we're really careful about holding on to all the cases. We are going to continue to ship those cases out. We store those cases. We take really good care of them. And we'd like those to remain in the market. And similarly, on the AI side, I know we're sort of joking about not being able to get away from AI, but I don't think you can, even when you're talking about hardware, right? And one of the things that we think about is it worth draining some lake in South America by another quarter inch to be able to more quickly answer how often people had sex the weekend of the Super Bowl? We're really curious about it. We can tell you. And it's fun for us to look at that, and it's fun for us to figure that out. But what is the most green? What is the least intrusive footprint that we can develop for our members to give them the experience that they need from us and still take care of their data and also take care of the planet?
Yeah. What a set of constraints that you have chosen for yourself here. And I say that half jokingly. My guess is you would say something like, "Well, I didn't choose it, right? Like it chose me a little, like the game chose me."
But to some degree, I think that, for anyone who's working in healthcare, I really believe this. Everyone working in healthcare is working in healthcare because they want better outcomes for people. There's other secondary motives. You want to make money, you want prestige, you just want the fun of it. But everyone is working in healthcare because they really care about making life meaningfully better for people. And I don't know that you can decide, I'm going to stop the door at worrying about how much energy I'm consuming with the AI models that we're using to do the firmware updates for our hardware. We would have to think it all the way through, which is what we try to do.
Erynn, this was a pleasure. Before we go, is there anything that you want to plug?
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah.
Of course.
So we love healthcare. We love making sure people can access their healthcare. We love making sure that hospitals and practitioners are going to stay in business. At Emme, we've made it our mission to save millions of dollars on healthcare, one person at a time. So we lower people's health costs 3 ways. We make sure people have the best priced healthcare plan. We routinely save people hundreds and thousands of dollars on their healthcare plan choice. We make sure people are getting the best possible price on their medical services. And if you get a weird or errant bill, we negotiate that bill for you. So we help you take care of that.
I think I saw on the website it's $25 annually,
$25 a year.
and you offer a refund if you do not achieve savings of $100 or more.
That's right. And so far,
That's
we've saved everybody at least $100.
that's amazing. I think you are putting your money where your mouth is on that.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
If we don't save you $100 on your health care, you need the $25 to get your health care.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
see these bills. We know what this looks like.
Yeah. Excellent. Any questions for me?
Yeah, what are you really excited about for this hackathon? I'm so curious to see where this
Oh
one's going.
boy.
What are you excited with healthcare in the next year? Like, where do you think this is going?
One thing we've been talking about internally is this is not a soldering iron type of hackathon. And instead, we are trying to get wearable devices and getting the data out of them. Part of that is probably going to be that we need to agree with our sponsors that people aren't going to break open their devices and try to directly access the chips inside of it. But the ideas that people are coming in with, I think, are the folks who have applied, which I grant is a subsection is a very specific
Yeah,
sampling.
specific set of geeks.
Yeah, are really interested in, I think, like taking more control of their health and more control or more just like granular details. And I was just, this is a weird jump, but I was listening to the Daily today about, oh no, excuse me, it was the Search Engine, which is, anyway, it's a
Is
podcast
that
called
John
Search Engine.
Patels?
It's PJ Vogt, who used to do Reply All, but they did a report on the Chinese peptides. And
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
it was interesting in the sense of there have always been biohackers and folks experimenting on themselves, but this is the first time that I've seen a large confluence of them gathered all in one place. What I am excited for is to be there as some of these folks are clashing their ideas that they came in with because we put them on teams, but we are waiting until they accept to announce the teams.
That
You
is
know,
super interesting.
so that we don't have to like tell people, yeah, you had this team, but then somebody didn't apply or somebody didn't actually
Right.
register and come through. But when they all get in a room together, I'm curious to see what comes out of that.
Mad scientist meets batteries.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All right, for this episode, Emme started as, and still is, a smart pill case. It was beautiful, award-winning, Kate Spade designed, beloved. It was so well designed that nobody ever needed to buy a second one, and they've only had 5 returns in 3 years. The CAC, or customer acquisition cost, of the device, the CAC, or customer acquisition cost, was $400, and the case retailed for $100. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Erynn Peterson, CEO of Emme, walks through what it took to flip those economics and what every hardware founder learns too late. Your margin is not like SaaS, where it's reliably 80%. It's more like 5% if you're lucky, and that's even before you spend $1 on marketing. You should also know that it is really expensive and fraught to market in women's health, much less women's reproductive health. This episode covers the full stack of hardware reality. Minimum order quantities before any supplier will take your call, ad channels that shadow ban women's reproductive health products, the shift from SEO to GEO that reshuffled the deck, just as Emme had finally figured out content strategy, and the firmware versioning nightmare that AI has only recently made tractable.